Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we will review one of the most important concepts in economics, the demand and supply model. This model is a core foundation not only for microeconomics but also for understanding real-world market behavior. We will revisit key concepts and strengthen your understanding so that you can confidently apply this model in future topics. Let's begin by reviewing the key terms. Before we dive deeper, let's go over the key terms you need to understand. We start with demand and supply, which represent consumers' willingness to buy and producers' willingness to sell. Then we have the law of demand and the law of supply, which describe how price affects quantity demanded and supplied. We also need to understand price, which is the value of a good or service, and quantity demanded and quantity supplied, which refer to specific amounts at a given price. Next, we use demand curves and supply curves to visualize these relationships. Their intersection gives us the equilibrium, including the equilibrium price and quantity, where the market is balanced. We also study situations where the market is not in equilibrium, such as excess supply, also known as surplus, and excess demand, also known as shortage. Finally, we will discuss the ceteris paribus assumption and the various factors that shift demand and supply curves. These concepts will be used throughout the course, so it's important to understand them clearly. The demand and supply model is a fundamental framework that explains how prices and quantities are determined in a market. To use this model, we rely on two key relationships. First, the demand curve slopes downward, meaning that as price decreases, the quantity demanded increases. This reflects a inverse relationship. Second, the supply curve slopes upward, meaning that as price increases, quantity supplied increases. This reflects a positive relationship. The point where these two curves intersect is called the market equilibrium, where both buyers and sellers agree on price and quantity. This model is very powerful. It helps us understand how prices are determined and how markets respond to changes such as income or costs, and how these changes affect equilibrium outcomes. It also allows us, uh, you know, to analyze real-world issues such as inflation, shortages, and surpluses. Okay, now let's learn how to build the demand and supply diagram step by step. First, we draw two axes. The vertical axis represents the price, which we label as P. The horizontal axis represents quantity, which we label as Q. This coordinate system allows us to visualize how price and quantity interact in a market. Next, we draw two curves. We draw a downward sloping demand curve, which we label as D. This reflects the inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. Then we draw an upward sloping supply curve labeled as S, reflecting the positive relationship between price and quantity supplied. At this stage, we can already see how buyers and sellers behave in response to price changes. And now we identify the equilibrium point. This is the point where the demand and supply curves intersect. We label this point as E0. At this point, we also identify the equilibrium price labeled as P0 and the equilibrium quantity labeled as Q0. This equilibrium represents a situation where the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied, meaning there is no shortage or surplus in the market. Now let's discuss an important concept called ceteris paribus. This is a Latin phrase that means all other things being equal. In economics, we use this assumption to isolate the relationship between the two variables. For example, when we say that an increase in price leads to a decrease in quantity demanded, we assume that all other factors, such as income, preference, and expectation, remain constant. This assumption allows us to move along a curve rather than shifting the curve. Without this assumption, it would be very difficult to analyze cause and effect relationship in economics. Now let's discuss what causes demand to shift. A shift in demand occurs when something other than price changes, leading to a different quantity demanded at every price. Several factors can cause this. First, income. If income increases, demand for normal goods typically increases. Second, taste and preference. For example, if people become more health conscious, demand for organic food may increase. Third, population changes, which affect the number of buyers in the market. Fourth, the price of related goods, such as substitute and complement. Finally, expectations about the future, such as expected price increases or income changes. These factors shift the entire demand curve either to the right or to the left. Now, let's take a closer look at the factors that affect demand, and more importantly, how these factors cause the demand curve to shift. One important factor is taste and preference. If a product becomes more popular, for example, due to trends, advertising, or social influence, more people want to buy, so demand increases. Sorry. Another factor is population. If the number of buyers in the market increases, such as population growth or expansion into new markets, demand will also increase. Next is income, especially for normal goods. When people earn more income, they tend to buy more goods and services, so demand shifts to the right. We also consider the price of related goods. If the price of substitutes increases, consumers will switch to these goods, increasing its demand. For example, if the price of Pepsi increases, more people may buy Coca-Cola. If the price of complements decreases, demand increases as well. For example, if gasoline becomes cheaper, people may drive more, increasing demand for cars. Finally, future expectations matter. If consumers expect prices to rise in the future, they may buy more today, which increases current demand. On the right-hand side, we see the opposite situation. Okay, let's look at different types of goods. A normal good is a product for which demand increases as income rises. An inferior good is the opposite. Demand decreases as income rises. Examples include the instant noodles or public transportation. A substitute good is something that can replace another goods. For example, Coca-Cola and Pepsi. A complementary good is something that is used together with another good, such as burgers and fries or cars and gasoline. Understanding these relationships helps understand, analyze how changes in one market affect another. Now let's turn to supply. A shift in supply occurs when something other than price changes, affecting the quantity supplied at every price. Several factors influence supply. First, natural conditions, such as weather, which can affect agricultural production. Second, input prices, including labor, raw materials, and machinery. Third, technology, which can improve efficiency and increase production. Finally, government policy, such as taxes, subsidies, and regulations. These factors shift the supply curve either to the right or to the left. Now let's move on to the supply side of the market and discuss what factors affect supply. First, factors that increase supply. When supply increases, producers are willing and able to supply more at every price level. One important factor is natural conditions. If conditions are favorable, for example, good weather for agriculture, production becomes easier and supply increases. Another factor is input prices. If the cost of inputs such as labor, raw materials, or machinery decreases, production becomes cheaper, so firms are willing to produce more. Next is technology. Improved technology allows firms to produce more efficiently, reducing costs and increasing output. As a result, supply increases. Finally, government policies play a role. If taxes are, lower or regulations become less costly, firms face fewer expenses, which encourages, production and increases supply. On the right-hand side, we see the opposite situation. Thank you for watching.